Welcome back to another Zero Context Patreon stock advertising my Patreon content one out of context theater moment at a time. I spent the first half of the month finishing up Zodiac, the first of the Zodiac series. Then I started on Unraveling Oliver. But then, you believe me? My lady, why in the Zodiac would I not? Because despite how much Ocus has been built up, the actual villain in this novel is grown-ups refusing to believe her because she's a child. Reasonable people don't believe in Ophiuchus. I want to shake him, but instead I cross my arms and glare. Hassan believes me. Matthias's jaw drops dangerously, and he finally snaps at me. Really, Ro? He's just a kid. I love how Matt immediately proves my point. Hassan's right, but for a Libran, he's not being entirely fair. My mom's lessons taught me that mining is the highest paid work on Gemini, so the mines are mostly filled with people who want to one day retire to the city and live like children again. Okay, but how realistic is that dream? Do those people actually end up doing it? Is it remotely possible at all? Or is it simply one of those pie in the sky, better keep your feet on the ground kind of things? There's a separate settlement in the caves of Gemini's other planet that's filled with people who aren't seeking an inhumanly long life. They're just normal humans who use their imaginations to build incredible cities within the rock. Again, how honest is this? Do people actually choose to live there, or are they people who are simply making the most out of the terrible life that they've been given? Although I admit that we wouldn't be alive without the Liberan's ship. Okay, did you really have to name them a few letters off from librarian? I would have used something like Libra-Ease for the sole reason of not confusing it with librarian. That Andre doesn't even look like you. Of course he doesn't. I was 11 years old when they named me guardian. Do you think a boy could ever command respect? I knew the council wouldn't give their consent, so I reprogrammed Neith to begin shielding my people from psi attacks. It was one thing when they refused to believe Ro, despite how correct all of her predictions turned out to be. They don't know her and she's literally a child. But for the Libra Council to not believe a grown adult that they've known for 6 goddamn years, why do they even have this system of government in place if nobody is going to believe the predictions? We're approaching Virgo and I'm locked in my cabin, mortified. I don't see how I can face Matthias or Hassan again. This is why people have such a hard time taking young adult novels seriously, because she's trying to warn literally 12 planets that doom is coming for them, and she's having a panic attack because she's realized that she's in a love triangle. On Stanton's 10th birthday, the same year she left, Mom gave me a necklace. It was the only gift she had ever given me that wasn't from Dad, too. On a strand of silver seahorse hair, she had strung together 12 Narclan pearls, each one being the sacred symbol of a house of the zodiac. We share the same universe, but we live in different worlds, she used to often remind me. Yet despite her insistence on the house's differences, I never saw the zodiac as a collection of multicolored pearls caught in the same necklace's orbit. I saw us as one necklace. Each pearl had its purpose, but no one is more important than another, and every pearl is integral to the beauty of the whole and to our calling ourselves a necklace at all. I'm embarrassed that it's taken this trip to show me how naive that sounds. Mom was right. Every house I visited functions as its own separate world. Even Cancer operates that way. I only ever thought of it like that before. We don't generally go around thinking of ourselves as one piece of a larger whole. Honestly, her first clue should have been how much Nishi stood out as an exchange student, that her physical appearance was so different from everybody else's, as was her personality and way of thinking. These houses might have once come together to defeat a great evil, but exactly as Rose figuring out, the other houses would sell every other house out for a singular corn chip crumb. You don't believe me. Still, after Vogaro, after all you've seen, make your case about the Psi attack, he says, his tone pleading. You can prove that with your ship's logs, and Moira will back you up. Why bring in children's story when you don't have to? You know it makes people tune out. I can't believe Matthias is asking me to lie. After everything he said about Hassan, now he's telling me to be exactly like him, to lie to my people for their own good. Again, not one single goddamn person has freaking believed you the second that you started mentioning the boogeyman. He's not asking you to lie. He's freaking asking you not to tell the entire freaking story so that people will take you seriously. There's a huge freaking difference. A riser is a person born into the wrong house. It's a change that happens when a person's exterior persona conflicts so strongly with their internal identity that they begin to develop the personality and physical traits of a different house. And it can happen at any age. Most people handle it well and either choose to stay on their home planets and continue living their lives, or move to the house that reflects their rising persona. It's kind of interesting to me that the author chooses to try and explain away things like rising and moon signs by having them be almost like an allegory for being trans. Fun sounds fun. As soon as I say the words, I cringe at how stupid they sound. Imagine sitting down to write, writing this, freaking acknowledging that it's stupid, and leaving it in anyway. That day, Stanton was bitten by the maw, and we rushed him to the healers, who did what they could for him, but no one could say with certainty if he would ever wake up. Stanton was out for 5 hours, and Mom and I had spent every one of those 300 minutes trying to find his fate in the Empress. But it was Dad, not the stars, who kept Stanton safe. He sucked the poison from his wound after the attack, and while Mom and I were off predicting if my brother still had a future, Dad was caring for Stanton in the present. He sat beside him and held his hand all 5 hours. This is the thing that gets me, because what Mom and Ro were doing was literally nothing. Meanwhile, Dad did 100% of the work before they got to the hospital. If this isn't the biggest freaking metaphor for this book, Ro can predict the future all she likes, but nobody listens to her predictions of doom, so more and more people keep getting hurt and or unalived. Yes, it's good to know if more attacks might be coming, but it's freaking meaningless if you don't freaking do anything about the predictions. Lord Neath stands at center stage holding the speaker's staff and scrolling Cerna's data on 4 large holographic screens that float through the sphere, proving beyond a doubt that the cosmic ray story was a desperate lie. Someone sent Ambassador Cerna's data to news stations across the galaxy. The students pelt Sharon with wadded scraps of food and trash until he is forced to take a seat. Well, 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 if it isn't the consequences of your actions. Yu says, we smoke herbs. His hand rises. Okay, well, thanks a lot. No, wait, I say, the image of a frothing black tongue forming in my mind. You mean like absinthe? Drugs. They plan on taking a shit-fuck ton of drugs and fighting off a great evil. That sounds like a fucking amazing plan. You know what? Why the fuck not? Let's all smoke pot and fight God. Sarcasm. Matt grabs Ro and they manage to get out of the room that they were in. Outside, an engineer says that the engine exploded. Around them, people are breaking the silence to call for help, not like it matters much seeing as how Orochimaru find them, regardless of what they did. They dig deeper in my center, staring into the blinking lights of the 12 constellations until I'm fusing with the synergy falling from the whole solar system. I'm borrowing psychic energy from people all around the way Ochus does, so my pulling tugs on his own store of psi energy, and his fist falls. Okay, so when she said that she needed the energy from the other 11 houses, I thought that she'd, need people from those houses to also be there with her, not that she herself would pull the energy and single-handedly defeat Orochimaru. This is a terrible cop-out, and I think even the author freaking knows it. Unity, my behind. Fine, says Shaoran. We have heard enough. The defendant has admitted her guilt, Excellencies. What say you? Oh boy, a kangaroo court! How lovely! But then again, I don't know why I'm surprised over this. These governments are run on a singular piece of chewing gum, a bent paperclip, and a hope and a prayer. Of course, not one single one of them actually knows how the justice system should function. Like, we've had this figured out for millions of years at this point. This shouldn't be news. Lawyer, the rights of the accused? Huh, not in my terrible young adult dystopia. She didn't like the limelight, and she underestimated her own contribution to the success of my books, insisting that my works were more important and that she was just a doodler. In a book about a man who professionally writes books for a living, it's honestly a shame that the author actively chooses to shit on another artist who works in a different medium. Say it with me, folks. You can write about literally anything, so why are you writing about somebody being a sexist, abusive jerkwad? Despite the fact that this book is called Unraveling Oliver, we instead get Alice's backstory. Not from Alice, because that would be giving way too much agency to a woman, and we can't have that. Oh no, not in my sexist novel. No, Alice's background is told from the perspective of her male neighbor, Barney. It's probably 5 years since I've laid eyes on Oliver Ryan, or Vincent Dax as he is better known. I have kept an eye on his success through the media, but the news about his savage behavior last November is a total surprise. They say that Alice might never recover. I 100% refuse to believe that this behavior came out of nowhere. Was everybody seriously blindsided by it, or did they simply ignore all of the red flags for years and years? I had been in the sole company of priests and boys at the border in St. Finian's since I was 6 years old, and apart from one summer on Stanley Conley's farm, where, quite frankly, his 3 feline sisters terrified me, I had no experience of women. Hey, Scout Press, please, I am begging you, hire me to fix the shit show books that you want to publish. Please. They were laughing together, so I laughed too, or pretended to, but it sounded fake. If the scene had been in a comic book, the speech bubble coming from my head would have said, guffaw, guffaw. I want to give you a tiny sample of how freaking terrible that this book is. Who writes this garbage? Who thinks that this is good literature and that everybody needs to read it? By the time we were in France, I was terrified of my homosexuality, but had convinced myself that it was a phase I could grow out of. Even though I had never envisioned my future as a happily married father, I always assumed that I would get married, father some children, and do what was expected of me. But that summer, it became impossible to keep my true desires buried. I wanted Oliver, but I couldn't tell him. Homosexuality in Ireland wasn't decriminalized until 1993. He's literally just a guy. Hate him with your car. Don't be a queer, he said. I dislike queers. Filthy bastards. Thanks. I am cured. He invited several Jewish families to make their homes in the wine cellars underneath the terrace steps, particularly between 1942 and 1944, as the roundups intensified with the full participation of our own French authorities. Again, this story is supposed to be about Oliver, a man who wasn't even born until a decade after this, yet for some unholy reason we're over here having a really long discussion about the occupation of France. I get that this is Veronique's story, but come on, this has nothing to do with Oliver and the author knows it. What about getting married, having children? I don't want children. What if you change your mind? About having children or being gay? The first one. What if you change your mind about having children? Silence. He wasn't programmed for that answer. I also hate organizations who tell people that their existence is akin to devil worship. If you don't believe me, ask my mother-in-law why she was forced to write with her right hand despite being left-handed. Chapter 9. Stanley. Oh great, another rando to ramble on about his life and never actually get to the point about what he has to do with Oliver. My father had died the year before I arrived in St. Finian's in South Dublin. I was 14 and had 3 sisters. I think Mammy just wanted me to have a more stable education and to have some more masculine influences on my life. I don't even know who you are. I don't give a flying fig about any of this. Chapter 10. Oliver. As much as I've been complaining about every Peter, Paul, and Mary coming out of the woodwork to talk about their prior relationship with Oliver, I feel like Oliver's chapters are somehow the worst, if only because it tries over and over to excuse away his sociopathic behavior even harder. Then it shifted to Eugene's thoughts, which, again, these are not the thoughts of a 7 or 8-year-old mind. These are the thoughts of a barely coherent toddler. As I said, I'm not fucking reading any of this, although I feel like the only thing of actual value was Eugene saying that Oliver was a bad man. Eventually, I informed Ellis that I could no longer write while Eugene lived under our roof. She agreed finally to his moving out when I found an obliging nursing home willing to take him. It was not cheap, a fact that Ellis seemed not to appreciate. She accused me of hating him. She overestimated my feelings for her brother. I simply did not want him around. I'm certain that there were plenty of red flags during their brief courtship, but this is such a huge one. Like, babe, him beating you was the final stop. You've been putting up with this shit for years and years. I was shocked to my core when I heard what Oliver did to Alice. Everyone is talking about it. I mean, he was never the violent type as far as I knew, and if anyone should know, it's me. If it had happened before, Alice would undoubtedly have told me. I am so glad I'm not around for the trial. Not all publicity is good publicity. Oliver certainly never raised a hand to me. I have seen him irritable, all right. The man could be cranky for sure, and occasionally towards the end of our relationship he was downright rude to me, but in the early days he was very different. Again, I feel like every single person turned a blind eye to anything Oliver did. He was too charming for it, after all. How could such a charming man turn out to be a complete sociopath? Sarcasm. I wonder how there could possibly be no trace of my birth mother. I know it was a different time, but how could this document have been improved? Money. The answer is money. In fact, I'm surprised that Oliver wasn't shipped off to some home in America as quickly as possible. Why did Daddy Dearest feel the need to keep him so close to the chest? As I passed the window, I realized there was a good view of my house, and I stopped momentarily to have a look before I continued on my way, but when I returned on the same road a while later, I passed Oliver, who was standing at the same window, a pair of binoculars raised to his eyes. His jaw was set in concentration, and he did not notice as I scurried past him, but a backwards glance confirmed what I instinctively suspected. The binoculars were trained on my home. He was spying on my house. No, really, I said. He was watching our house through binoculars. Mom was interested at last. A senior boy? He was probably just bird watching or plane spotting. Honestly, it's the kind of nonsense that only comes to mind well after the fact when you know all the info. Now, as an adult, Philip can say with certainty that Oliver was watching the house. But as a child, I'm 100% on the side of Mom and Dad here. It's ridiculous to think that the boy was intentionally spying on the house. If you like my content, you can become a member on Patreon. Now you can join for free and get access to all of my free stuff. For only $1 a month, you can have access to so much, including the contents for all of this month's commentary and more. I'll see you next month, guys.